Story recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a fantasy, horror, and mystery film called Haunter. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. One day, Lisa Johnson wakes up to the sound of a walkie-talkie. Her little brother Robbie wants to play with her in their secret cave, but Lisa just turns off the portable radio. In the living room, Lisa returns the walkie-talkie to Robbie while he plays a video game. Robbie says Lisa should blame Edgar for leaving it in her room, but Lisa points out that Edgar is not real. Afterward, Lisa's mother, Carol, tells her to do the laundry, but Lisa replies she already did it yesterday. However, Carol doesn't believe her, and she asks Robbie where his glasses are before asking Lisa where they're going for her birthday the next day. Lisa then goes to the basement to do the laundry, and it's obvious that she's pissed. Later on, Lisa checks the thick fog outside, but her father, Bruce, closes the door. Bruce tells Lisa it's not a good idea to go anywhere, but Lisa is too distracted looking at their car to listen to him. Then, when Bruce notices that and asks what's wrong, Lisa assures him everything's fine. Moments later, Lisa plays the clarinet and goes downstairs where her parents call her. Carol and Bruce want to know why some clothes are missing from the laundry, but Lisa swears she doesn't know what happened to them. At the same time, Lisa says the clothes are gone every day. Her parents then get confused, so Lisa explains that she noticed they've been doing the same thing every single day. Unfortunately, Carol and Bruce don't believe Lisa, but the girl still tries to make them understand that there's no tomorrow. She says it's always the day before she turns 16, frustrating Bruce and making him think she's just bored. Exasperated, Lisa says they're stuck in that house, but before she can tell her parents why, Robbie shouts out and interrupts them. Carol and Bruce comfort Robbie, but Lisa refuses to do the same when her parents ask her to. Sadly, their day is just like the previous one, and Lisa can't help but feel miserable. The next day, Lisa wakes up again to the sound of the walkie-talkie and sees the thick fog outside. As usual, Carol tells Lisa to do the laundry and asks Robbie where his glasses are. She also asks Lisa what they should do on her birthday, and the girl eventually goes to the basement to wash their clothes. Seconds later, Lisa hears something and decides to investigate, seeing something behind the washing machine. Then, the washing machine's lid suddenly closes. There, Lisa answers the ringing phone only to hear nothing but static. She also proceeds to play her clarinet, but she gets distracted when someone calls her name. Curious, Lisa checks the vent, but Carol shows up in her room and asks why some of their clothes are missing. Again, Lisa says she doesn't know where the clothes are, and she only gets annoyed when her mother asks her to come downstairs. They then have the same conversation and eat the same food, and at 1:14 a.m., Lisa sees a shadow outside her door. Despite being scared, Lisa leaves her room and looks around, going to the attic when she sees the door open. However, the door slams shut, forcing Lisa to return to her room. The next day, Lisa moves the washing machine aside and tries to open the small red door in the wall. Unfortunately, she doesn't have its key, so she just leaves it alone. While playing the clarinet, Lisa hears something from the attic and bravely goes there. Then, she turns on the light and sees their videotapes on the floor, deciding to play one of them. The tape shows the Johnson family moving into their house on August 24, 1984, and Lisa realizes someone was standing by the window. Sadly, the tape abruptly ends, leaving Lisa wondering who that person is. Instead of going back downstairs, Lisa uses the Ouija board. She tries to see if there's a spirit in their home and asks if they're trying to communicate with her, and the little rocking chair in the dollhouse gently moves. Carol then calls Lisa and asks where their other clothes are, and when Lisa looks at the Ouija board again, she is surprised to see the planchette on the word yes. As if on cue, the light suddenly starts flickering. Lisa is unaware that there's someone behind her, but when she looks back, all she sees is the rocking chair toy moving. Then, Lisa sees a man's reflection on the television, and when it suddenly cracks, she immediately heads downstairs. While having dinner, Carol lets Robbie go when the boy asks if he can play with Edgar. At the same time, Lisa is shocked to see her father smoking, saying that's not part of the routine. Lisa says she's never seen him smoke before, but Carol assures her that Bruce will eventually quit. Afterward, Lisa gets even more confused when she sees Carol reading a book instead of watching a show with Bruce and Robbie. Lisa then checks on her father as he fixes the car in the garage, seeing the man agitated and talking to himself. But Bruce soon notices Lisa, so he tells his daughter to go back inside. At 1:14 a.m., the shadow appears outside Lisa's room again. This time, her door slowly opens and all Lisa can do is hide under the blanket. Then Lisa hears someone whisper her name and sees a hand touching her blanket, but Lisa finds herself alone when she suddenly sits up. The next day, Robbie wakes Lisa up using the walkie-talkie, asking her to quickly come downstairs. There, Lisa finds her parents fighting, with Bruce throwing things around. Bruce demands to know where Carol hid the spark plugs, and when his wife says she doesn't know where they are, he asks Lisa. Bruce says the car isn't working because the spark plugs are missing, but their conversation gets interrupted when someone rings the doorbell. Upon answering the door, Carol lets the pale man in, who claims he's there to fix their phone. Strangely, Lisa suddenly feels unwell when she sees him, but the pale man only smiles and walks past her. The pale man goes upstairs to check their telephone that's been affected by the fog, and once he's gone, Carol tells Lisa to do the laundry. However, Lisa says she needs to go to her room first because she forgot something. Upstairs, Lisa finds the pale man sitting on her bed. The pale man wants to know how long she's been awake, but Lisa says she isn't sure. Lisa asks him who he is and what happened to her family, but the stranger doesn't answer her. Instead, he instructs Lisa to ignore the noises and voices calling out to her in that house. At the same time, the pale man warns Lisa that her family will suffer if she tries to contact the living. Then, Lisa notices her reflection on the pale man's glasses before he leaves, shocked to see herself as a skeleton. That night, Robbie asks his mother again if he can play with Edgar. Bruce is already calm and he gets puzzled when Lisa asks where his cigarette is. Then, Lisa asks about her parents' fight earlier, but they have no idea what she's talking about. Frustrated, Lisa takes her bicycle and leaves the house despite her father's protests. As she rides her bicycle away from that place, Lisa calls out to see if someone's out there. Unexpectedly, she finds her way back home, but she leaves again even though her father tells her to return inside. Sadly, no matter what Lisa does, she always ends up in front of their house. At 1:14 a.m., Lisa goes to the attic to talk to the entity reaching out to her. As it turns out, Lisa is aware she's already dead, and that entity is a person currently living in their house. However, Lisa isn't sure how she died or why, and after sleepwalking for so long, she says she's now awake. Using the Ouija board, Lisa tries to communicate with the living. Unfortunately, nothing happens, so she just returns to her room. There, Lisa finds someone sleeping in her bed, and when she slowly pulls the blanket, she sees a girl, Olivia. Lisa then tries touching her, but Olivia suddenly wakes up and holds her hand. The girl also knows Lisa's name and asks for her help, and when a man knocks on the door, she tells Lisa to look under the floor. But the door opens before Lisa can do that, and she soon finds herself alone in her room, eventually passing out. The next day, Lisa checks what's under the floor and sees a collection of news clippings about missing girls. Lisa can't help but cry as she looks at the girls' faces, and then she finds the keys to the red door in the small pocket of the scrapbook. Lisa quickly uses it to open the door and realizes it leads to a tunnel, where she finds a bottle of poison. Lisa also sees a watch, and when she hears a sound, she discovers a furnace at the end of the tunnel. Reluctantly, Lisa peeks through it and sees a girl asking for help. Then, the girl suddenly burns, causing Lisa to flee. While having breakfast, Bruce answers the phone and tells Lisa that her teacher wants to talk to her about her assignment. Of course, Lisa knows it's the pale man on the phone, and the stranger tells her to mind her own business. Despite that, Lisa asks the pale man about the scrapbook under her bedroom floor. The pale man then says that their house is his and that it always has been, telling her to stop opening doors that are meant to be closed. After their conversation, Lisa finds a boy sitting at the table who turns out to be Edgar. Edgar whispers something to Robbie, so the boy asks his mother if he can play with his friend. Worried for her brother, Lisa tries to attack Edgar, but Robbie stops her. Bruce also asks Lisa what she's doing, but when she explains Edgar is sitting with them, her father doesn't believe her. Then Edgar vanishes and appears behind Lisa, talking in the pale man's voice and saying they only see what he lets them see. As if on cue, the light suddenly becomes brighter, and the time moves faster. Lisa sees that her brother and parents are dead, and when she hugs Robbie, he suddenly becomes a desiccated corpse. The same thing happens to their parents, leaving Lisa devastated as she watches them turn into skeletons before finally disappearing. The time then finally stops, and all Lisa can do is beg to have her family back. However, Lisa realizes she's not alone when Bruce calls her. Lisa's family is still there, and Bruce quickly comforts his crying daughter. Afterward, Lisa returns to her room and hears the sound of running water from the bathroom. So she goes there to turn off the faucet, getting scared when she sees Olivia in the mirror. Lisa tries touching Olivia, but when the girl feels her hand, the light suddenly becomes brighter. Seconds later, the bathroom changes and Lisa realizes she's in Olivia's body. Her bedroom has also changed, and she finds a different clarinet on the bed. Then, Lisa finds an article about a family of 4 found dead in their house. The report was published on April 23, 1985, stating that Bruce, Carol, Lisa, and Robbie Johnson died from carbon dioxide poisoning. After learning the truth about her family, Lisa goes downstairs and sees Olivia's sister, Emily, in the living room. The young girl sees Lisa as Olivia, and Olivia's mother, Anne, doesn't suspect a thing too. In the garage, Olivia's father, David, keeps fixing the broken car. He tells Lisa to return inside as he tries to smoke, only to get pissed when the lighter doesn't work. He then asks Lisa not to come into the garage again, and when Lisa doesn't answer, he shouts at her. At that moment, Lisa notices David's stained teeth before collapsing. Then Carol finds Lisa in the garage, telling Bruce their daughter is sleepwalking. Because of that, Carol suggests calling a doctor, but Bruce reminds her the phones are still out. So Lisa just requests Carol to bring her some food before asking Bruce if he's already found the spark plugs, saying that's why the car won't start. But Bruce says it's just an engine valve and he promises to fix the vehicle before Lisa's birthday. Once Bruce leaves the room, Lisa tries communicating with Olivia. Unfortunately, she is forced to stop when Robbie talks to her through the walkie-talkie, and the boy says Edgar wants to punish her for being bad. Robbie adds he's with Edgar in the secret cave, so Lisa quickly goes to the basement and sees the small door open. Wasting no time, Lisa looks for Robbie in the tunnel and enters the furnace, where she finds a trapdoor in the ceiling and skeletons on the ground. Then, Robbie tells Lisa through the walkie-talkie that he's actually hiding in the attic with Edgar. Sad to say, Lisa fails to rescue her brother, for the pale man suddenly shows up and closes the furnace. Moments later, Lisa finds a class ring with the year 1954 engraved on it. At the same time, the trapdoor suddenly opens, and Lisa sees a vent on the other side. So Lisa tries to climb and reach the vent, and even though the light suddenly flickers, Lisa continues moving. It isn't long before Lisa comes out of the vent and finds herself in the garage. There, Lisa finds another girl, Frances, who is trying to escape. Lisa recognizes her from the scrapbook, saying she was the first girl that went missing. However, Lisa isn't sure who the culprit is, and Frances doesn't know the name of the man she's trying to get away from. According to Frances, she was walking after the movies last night when a man closing up his store asked if she needed a ride home. Frances says the man suddenly grabbed her and put a cloth over her face, causing her to pass out. Then she woke up in that garage, tied up in the backseat of the car, and Frances adds she thought she was going to suffocate. As Frances finally breaks the garage door lock, Lisa tells her they're all being kept as prisoners by the same man who kidnapped her. Lisa says the man trapped them all in that house, intending to keep them asleep to control them. Lisa also tells Frances there's nothing out there when she opens the door, making the girl understand she's been dead for years. Frances refuses to accept the truth, so Lisa shows the girl her ring and says they connected when she touched it. Then Lisa explains that the man dumped Frances's body down below and burned her up, just like all the other girls. Unfortunately, Lisa says they must wake up and returns Frances's ring, but a hand suddenly grabs the girl out of the garage before she can take it. Once again, the light flickers and Lisa finds herself back in 1985 with her mother. After going to a different timeline, Lisa searches the garage and finds a bottle of diethyl ether, which is used as a starting fluid for some engines. That's when she realizes her father killed them, and she accuses her mother of not doing anything to save them. Enraged, Lisa tells Carol she won't let it happen again before leaving. Upstairs, Lisa asks Robbie if he knows they're dead, and the boy says he only figured that out that morning when he found his glasses. Robbie adds that he was scared of finding his glasses, revealing he was wearing them the night they died. Still, Robbie assures Lisa that everything will be okay, saying that's what Edgar told him. Frustrated, Lisa goes to her room to reach out to Olivia. Soon, she finds herself in Olivia's body again, wasting no time telling the girl to get out of that house by riding on her arm. At the same time, Lisa sees the iPad and watches the video that Olivia made for her. The video shows Olivia talking to Lisa, saying the man who lived there before her was named Edgar Mullins. According to Olivia, Edgar was born in that house and he killed all those girls over the years before dying in 1983. Olivia is scared because her father has changed while her mother is useless, totally in denial, and she says no one will believe a word she says. Olivia then shows Lisa her necklace, revealing they connected when she found it. Feeling hopeless, Olivia begs Lisa to help her save her family, and that's when the video finally ends. Downstairs, Lisa finds Olivia's parents fighting. David is looking for something, and Anne tells Lisa to go upstairs when she sees her. Then, David becomes the Pale Man, telling Lisa she shouldn't be down there. Scared, Lisa urges Anne to flee with her family, but the woman only gets confused. It isn't long before the Pale Man goes after Lisa, who manages to run outside. Sadly, as she tries to call for help, she runs into an invisible barrier and collapses. Seconds later, the Pale Man tells Lisa a ghost can never leave its house. He then erases what Lisa wrote on Olivia's arm, and eventually Lisa wakes up in bed with her mother. Carol says she now knows they're dead, pointing out that she realized it when Lisa told her she didn't save them. Carol shows Lisa the missing clothes, revealing she packed them because she planned to sneak out of the house with her and Robbie in the middle of the night, while Bruce was asleep. Unfortunately, they never made it out and Bruce is still clueless about their situation. Afterward, Lisa confronts her father in the garage and says he lost spark plugs on purpose. Lisa says Bruce hid them from himself because he knew what he was turning into, making Bruce recall where he put the spark plugs. Lisa then tells her father to put them back in the engine, and once Bruce starts the car, he finally remembers what he did. Bruce recounts how he used ether on Carol, Lisa, and Robbie before bringing them to the garage. But he can't even bring himself to say how he killed them. Despite that, Lisa assures him it wasn't his fault and adds someone used his body to do those things. However, the rearview mirror, windshield, and windows break before Lisa can say who the culprit is. Now that they're all awake, their home suddenly shakes and the power surge scares them. Then, the house changes, allowing them to see Edgar's family photo. Despite being terrified, Lisa forces her family to flee. The sun's shining when Lisa opens the door, and Robbie can't help but run outside. Of course, Carol quickly follows the boy, prompting Bruce to run after them too. Meanwhile, Lisa refuses to leave and chooses to face Edgar. At 1:14 a.m., Lisa sees Edgar using ether on his parents. Then, the boy tells Lisa to get out of his house, and when she hides it, it is revealed that the pale man is the old Edgar. As Lisa barricades herself in Edgar's room, Edgar tells her he doesn't need her anymore. With no time to waste, Lisa communicates with Olivia and begs her to bring her back, and soon, she finds herself in Olivia's body. In Olivia's room, Lisa hides under the bed as David opens the door. David goes to the bathroom to search for his daughter, allowing Lisa to sneak down to the basement. Lisa then pushes the washing machine aside and breaks the wall, going inside the tunnel to pick up everything that belonged to the people that Edgar killed. Lisa urges them to wake up and focuses on Francis's ring, but David, who's being controlled by Edgar, renders her unconscious. When Lisa wakes up, she realizes she's bound in the car with Anne, so she uses the lighter in the vehicle to burn the tape restraining her hands. But Edgar arrives with Emily before she can escape. Edgar then places Emily inside the car as Lisa pretends to be unconscious, and when he gets inside the vehicle, he reveals he knows the girl is awake. Also, Edgar tells Lisa she was the same way when she was alive, trying to save her family from him. After that, Edgar starts the car and tells Lisa it's time for her to go, but the girl strangles him using the tape in her hands. Then, Lisa takes the keys and throws them outside, only to discover that Edgar has the spare. Annoyed, Edgar grabs Lisa as she tries to run past him, but Francis shows up and takes him to a dark place. There, Edgar faces everyone he killed, and it isn't long before they send him to the furnace to burn. Meanwhile, David retakes control of his body and brings his family back inside the house. He also apologizes to Olivia, who's still being possessed by Lisa. Then, Lisa wishes Olivia to have a good life before going to sleep. Eventually, Lisa wakes up in her room, but she soon realizes it's already her birthday. Lisa's family has now escaped the horrible time loop they're in, and she gets to celebrate her special day with her parents and brother in heaven.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.